Hey, remember when you were in the Beatles and you did that album, Abbey Road, and at the very end of the song, it goes, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. You remember that?
Yes.
Is that true?
Yes, Chris. In my experience, it is. I find the more you give, the more you get.
All right, welcome to another episode of Between Two Wheels podcast. This is Tyler Janke coming to you today. No guest hosts, but we have a guest in studio in the office here, Mike Sayers. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate
hold that up nice and close. And your son's here. He's off camera. He's playing games, but we won't join him in unless it gets to specific stuff that we need to talk to him about.
Yeah, if you want to know the secrets, then he'll tell you.
Okay, good to know. Well, thank you for coming in. First of all, I really appreciate it. Mike is, in case people don't know, Mike will give you a breakdown because we'll walk through your history here, but well known in the Sacramento area, internationally as well, for cycling. And you're venturing into some new stuff with your endurance and your fitness and your coaching. But why don't you give us a breakdown of kind of who you are, what you're doing right now, and then we'll go back, start from the beginning, and kind of work our way through your life.
Okay. Well, my name is Mike Sayers. I grew up here in Sacramento, and I currently partially own and run an endurance training facility in Midtown Sacramento, and we kind of cover the gambit. We do coaching, bike fitting, physiological testing, and then we have a running component. We have a running coach that works for us from Fleet Feet, and we service some runners with strength and conditioning classes, and then I do some personal training, and my partner Julie Young also does personal training.
But let's talk about some of this real quick, and this is going to be all over the board.
Yeah,
this is kind of the way I like it. How do you feel about, coaches, especially cycling coaches? It feels like you can just have an online presence. You guys went for brick and mortar. And what was the kind of the thought process of doing that, and how is it going?
Well, it's always a struggle, of course, because it's like any small business. I mean, we have the same issues. But I think for us, the first and foremost goal was to create a community. So if I just go back a little bit and say, like, when I was racing full time, I didn't feel like I had a place where I could go and get information or just hang out or do a workout or do whatever. If you went to a bike shop, then clearly the bike shop wanted you to buy something and then leave. I'm speaking as a bike racer too.
Right.
So that was where the initial idea came from. And I really got the idea from my best friend in life who is in Seattle, who has a very similar, much larger, much more successful facility called Metier.
Is that Todd?
Yeah, that's Todd Harriet. And Todd was my coach, and now he's my best friend. And Todd and I...
Were those conflicting? I mean, you couldn't be before, but now he's your best friend?
There's quite a story there, actually. There's quite a story. But no, to answer your question, in our instance, no, we could not be friends until after I was done racing,
Gotcha.
Pretty much. So, yeah, I mean, the brick and mortar, first and foremost, the community thing. Secondarily, we really felt like it would show our clients or just the community that we were invested in them, not just sitting in a room somewhere doing coaching programs or talking to them on the phone or texting or whatever, that we actually were like, okay, well, we have the space and we can do things for you in addition to just coaching. And the coaching part is just one part of it. The bike fitting part is a part of it, the personal training part. And, personally, I've gotten a lot of enjoyment and fulfillment by working with people who don't really race.
Right.
That's not really where our focus is. I mean, certainly we can do that, but like, for example, one of my best clients is Judy Polnikoff, who used to own City Bicycle Works, which is now the Trek store. Right. She doesn't own it anymore, but she and I spend at least 2 hours a week together working on her fitness to do whatever it is that she wants to do, whether it's riding or running or skiing or whatever.
Well, that's cycling, and we can talk about kind of the path that cycling takes in itself here, and even in Northern California and the racing. It seems like things are sky's pulling out. There's always things going. And so focusing your business not specifically on the cycling world is probably a good idea, especially with the running that they have in town. And then you can kind of fluff off and use the cycling part to, I don't know, to do something with it there.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, because I didn't think it was going to go this way. I mean, I really thought that I thought it would be cycling based and really only focused in that area, but it was. I mean, the fact is, if we go back through my history, I was unable or I was unwilling to go to college because I was trying to chase my cycling career. So this has ended up being my MBA in business because I run the day-to-day, and it's taught me how to be a bookkeeper. It's taught me how customer service. And again, I've made no bones about this. It has really absolutely changed me as a person, and it from the very top to the very bottom. And the way I deal with my son, the way I deal with my wife, the way I deal with other people, it really helped me transition from being a professional bike rider and being in that world of very high pressure, very fast, especially the way we were living it, where I was on the road, 200 plus days a year. It got me out of that, and it got me a lot more centered, and it gave me a lot more foundation. And so the business for me has done more than just provided an outlet for me to work at and all the things that come with that. It has really changed me. And
so what are some of those things that you've had to, well, not just had to change, but what's changed about you specifically because you have, is it like kind of the community outreach part, or?
I think it's given me a better understanding of people in general. It's given me a better understanding of character. And then from that, I've been able to kind of work with myself. And, I was a pretty high-strung guy when I was a rider. I mean, I had a bit of...
You're not now?
I try not to be. I mean, the truth is I try
so not
not
as
to
much,
be.
is
Not
it?
as much. I mean, I do try to... I'm a lot more introspective of myself. I think the problem with being at a really high level of cycling, and when I mean high level, I mean the highest level.
Right.
So Tour de France level, is you get caught up in that world, and it's really difficult to get out of it. Not because you don't want to, but because that's what the job requires. The job requires you to be 100% in, especially if you're fighting for things like yellow jerseys. And so for me, it has allowed me to get out of that space and be a little more in touch with people, and certainly a lot more in touch with myself, and really just, I think, have a lot more empathy, a lot more sympathy, and a lot more understanding of where people are coming from in everyday life and how they want to weave in their athletic prowess, whatever that is, into that life. And again, when you ride full time, and that's what you're paid to do, and I really did embrace it as a job. I mean, I didn't look at it as half of anything, and my wife could certainly attest to that. I mean, for me, it was at least 40 hours a week, and that included the training, but then the off the bike stuff too, just the bike maintenance, the body maintenance, and everything. It's like all of these high profile athletes, LeBron James, all these guys. So I approached it like that. I mean, that's what I dedicated my time to, and there was always very little time off. And then you were right back at it again. And I think you get in that mode, and you get in that world, and sometimes you lose touch with what reality is.
Well, in some of that, I mean, it's the world of cycling, because if you're at the top, it's always, I don't want to be pushed off the top step.
Right.
But even if you're in that world, but you're on the bottom rung of it, you're getting a 1 year, 2 year contract. I mean, someone else young is coming in. Right. You've always got to be, if there's no stability.
No.
So
and you always have to be fighting. Because if you're at the top, you're fighting to stay at the top.
Right.
And if you're not at the top, you're fighting to get to the top. And, it's really, I used to tell, when I was running the national team, I used to tell some of the young guys, you see these riders, some of the best in the world, and they win, just pick a stage of the Tour de France. And I mean, you can see the pure joy that some of these guys have. Right. And it's not because they just won a bike race. It's because they may, in fact, some of those guys may have spent 20 plus years trying to win a single bike race. and they happen to win one at the biggest event ever. And yeah, they are super happy.
And they'll not have to buy a beer for the rest of their life in their hometown. And, those.
And I do exactly. And I do think that on top of all of that, I believe that high pressure athletes, not even high pressure, I think even weekend warriors don't allow themselves to enjoy their successes, because you're always fighting to be better. It's, if I train harder, if I go harder, if I do more, if I do this, if I, and so there's a lot of, I need to do this. And I think that creates kind of a negative connotation in a way. And then when they get success, it's like, oh yeah, I had a success, and they let themselves enjoy it for maybe 5 minutes. And then they're back on to like heavy critique. And for sure, I was the embodiment of that.
How is that as a masters now? So you do masters racing, and maybe you don't have to put in the effort that you were doing before, but you see a lot of masters racers are really intense. I mean, it's the be all end all. And I don't try to do that. And maybe that's where my results suffer, but I'm enjoying my life with kids and everything too. And, but what do you do, or even coaching, of trying to maybe take these guys, even an aspect of doing maybe some running so that they have some bone strength in them, and so they're not brittled old masters guys that only ride a bike.
Right. And I've been really fortunate, because I've been able to work with a lot of very talented exercise phys people who have opened my eyes to things like running, because like running when I was a rider was like taboo.
Right.
But now it's actually an integral part of, for example, the Dutch national team. They use it as an integral part of their development program. So, so I guess to answer your question directly, because that was sidebar, but the fact is, I think you do have to find a life balance. And for me, my wife, and I give her all the credit in the world, she was integral in my retirement phase. And she really put it quite succinctly to me one night. I remember exactly the conversation. She literally turned to me and said, "You are more unhappy racing your bike than you are not racing your bike." Like the pendulum had swung, because I was 38 years old. I'm going to races, and my roommates are 22 years old.
Right.
They're on the upswing. They have unlimited energy. They have unlimited fitness. And at 38, I didn't have any of that. Like I didn't have unlimited energy. I didn't have unlimited fitness. Like my fitness, I had reached it and gone beyond it, and I was in loss prevention. So it really became, I became more unhappy racing than I was racing. So that was really what told me I had to stop.
Now you had, I would say, 2 phases, because you had the racing part, and then you went into somewhat managing, whether it was the U23 team or doing stuff with BMC. And then this last year you were out doing with the Israel Cycling Academy. So was your wife concerned about, now you've stopped racing, but you're on the road even more?
Yes. To answer your question, yes.
Okay. Well, obviously that quit as well. So you're back. Are you even doing anything besides just some interim managing?
Not right now. I'm working on a few projects, but it's all just projects at this point. And no, I'm not. I haven't gone back to directing. And the fact was that there was a period in time I actually was on the road more as a director, because as we go back to the original kind of the all in, like racing at that level or being part of a team at that world tour level is all encompassing. I was living in Europe and my family was living here. So I was doing upwards of like 4 months in Europe, and then I would come home and I would hang out with my family for a couple of weeks, and then I would go back. And then not only am I in Europe kind of on my own, which means not only for myself, but for the team, it was like, okay, well, you don't have any other things going on, so you can go to this race and you can go to that race. Right. And of course I was happy to do it, because those guys were my family at that point. And so the staff and the riders became, my outlet when I was on the road, and they really were my family. I'm still very close with all of those people.
Sure.
But yeah, it's really quite difficult. It's really easy to just, it's like anything. It's like any sport. It's really easy to sit on a couch and watch people perform and just think, man, those are glory days. And they are at that moment, but there is a price to pay at every single level. And it varies from from guy to guy what that price is.
Sure. And you can, I doubt you look back with too much regret at any, maybe you do, we can get into some of that. But I mean, and let's start actually talk about how you got into cycling through some of your teams, because it'll become evident that what I'm saying is you've had a pretty good life in the cycling world, and it's afforded you a lot of opportunities, including what you're doing now. So
Absolutely.
How did you get into this sport? Because I imagine you played other sports growing up, and I was just talking to your son. He says he plays soccer. And I always wonder, how do Americans get into the sport of cycling? Because it's kind of a weird route usually to do so.
Yeah, very interesting story, actually. I grew up alpine ski racing. My dad was quite good, and it runs in my family. And so I was racing from, I think the first race I ever did was like 5 or 6 years old, and I was pretty heavy into it up until about the time I got midway through high school. And then I started to kind of phase out a little bit, only because I knew I was good enough to race at a local or maybe even a continental level, but not really anywhere beyond that. And so, long story short, I was hanging out or living in Olympic Valley at that point, which is Squaw Valley.
Yeah.
And Warren Gibson had the Plymouth Reebok team, was located out of there. And in the summertime, those guys would ask me to go ride with them, because I would ride in the summer to keep fit for ski racing. And so I started riding with guys like Drew Holdeman. That's a name that not many people would know, but he was a really good local amateur guy here in Northern California from San Jose. And Price, Daryl Price, I believe, who went on to mountain bike. Anyway, I was riding with those guys, and again, long story short,
were they mostly a junior, like a development team at the time? Okay.
Yeah, they were a junior team. Larson was there. Steve Larson rode for them. And they convinced me to go try a race. The first race I did was in Patterson, just a local criterium in the middle of the Central Valley. And I ended up meeting another really good friend of mine who's from Sacramento, Corey McCracken, who no longer lives here. But he and I kind of started off together down this road. And we were working at a bike shop together in South Sac, and we were racing on the weekends. And then I had a couple of interesting things happen. The first thing was I got an offer to go ride in France. This was right away, so like 1992, and I was barely a Cat 2 for a couple of months. So I did with a guy from Colorado, and I was there for about a month, maybe 6 weeks, and it kind of got my fire burning. It was just local racing around the Toulouse area, but it was good. It was good racing. It was hard. There was a lot of Eastern Bloc guys there. So then I came back, and I was racing 1 year here in Northern California, and then again through a series of events, through some connections, I got an opportunity to go back to Switzerland and race for the entire year. This would have been 1994, and so I did. And that team was quite good. I would say at that point they would rival any continental team in America. And if you look at the roster, there was a guy that was there that I ended up being teammates with years later, Alexander Moose, who was a big-time guy at BMC and then went on to mountain bike professionally. Right. Swiss guy. And there was a couple of other guys that ended up going on to World Tour level. So after that year, I came back in August. I think I left right after Visalia, so it would have been first part of March, I think, and then I came back in August. So it's gone an entire year, almost an entire year. And when I came back, of course, everybody had kind of forgotten about me, and so I was trying to find a team. I couldn't find a team. I couldn't get anybody to take me, and our kind of a pillar in this community, Folsom specifically, John Cruz, offered to support me for a year, and he ran what is now Mike's Bikes in Folsom. It wasn't Mike's when he had it, but he supported me for a year. And in that year, I was able to battle my way to, at that point, there was an amateur point series.
Is this like 95 then?
Yeah, around 95. Yeah. So I was able to battle my way to second overall in this national point series.
Were you riding solo or okay?
Riding solo. And I only went to half of the races. And the guy who beat me was Thurlow Rogers, who was on Nutrifig at that point and went on to, he did every race.
Right.
So then I went with a local team in first part of 96 out of Salt Lake City, sponsored by Brugger's Bagels.
The Einstein that turned into, okay.
Yeah, so Einstein's, and that was Levi Leipheimer, Burke Swindlehurst, myself, and this wonderful person
Little
on
Dave
earth.
Zabriskie.
Yeah, little Dave Zabriskie was about 16 years old, and this other gentleman who nobody knows, but his name is Eric Messenger. He's now a smoke jumper out of Idaho.
Oh wow!
And he and his wife both. And anyway, that part I parlayed that into an opportunity with Nutrafig, which turned into Mercury several years later. And I was with that organization all in for about 8 years.
So interesting. And maybe it was you, my first possible interaction with you. The High-Uintas stage race. Did you do that in that
sure I
area that was from Uintas to Camas to Evanston, Wyoming?
Yeah.
And
right.
I remember you. I think Burke was there, and maybe you and. You guys pulled up, and I think someone had some medals hanging out of your mirror or something like that. I don't know. But the thing that was interesting about that day was Zabriskie, because he did like the junior race, and he came in solo, just smashing the field.
Yeah.
And then that year out at Super Week, he was winning race after race after race, and you just knew that something was going to come of that guy.
Right.
So anyway, Levi was there. So you guys went from that, and then you went into, it was Comptel, right?
Yeah.
Mercury, and just looking at kind of the roster of some of those guys, I'm going to bring up some names.
Okay.
Because now it reminds me of, so I raced with Oil Me for a while, and I remember that team.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the same thing with you and Comptel, where a bunch of young guys and then some older guys mixed in that were kind of has-been, or, I'm not saying Thurlow Rogers was has-been, but him,
right.
Andy Bishop, right?
Yep.
Some guys that had done some things but weren't for some reason on any other teams.
Right.
But one guy that struck my my memory was David Klinger.
Yes.
So the guy, what do you think? I mean, because the situation with him is his facial tattoo,
Right.
and became kind of a big deal, and he got booted off of, I'm trying to, Webcore maybe at the time.
At the time, yeah.
And then kind of had a whole downfall, drug issues, trying to come back. And I guess my question is, and you don't have to say anything about these, but did you see any of this coming from someone like Dave Klinger?
No, not at all. In fact, when Dave was with us, he was a very young guy, and he was incredibly talented. And I think a lot of people had kind of earmarked him as the next great classics rider. And Dave was like any young guy. He was influenced, and he wanted to be something that he wasn't as a bike rider. Like, he wanted to be a pure climber, and he just wasn't. Like, he was kind of a stocky kid, but super powerful, and a really good sprinter, and really good at the end of like 150K. And he ended up getting, I'd have to go back and look, but he got a really good result at Philly that 1 year. He got and then he parlayed that into a job with Festina. And I don't know what happened after that. I haven't ever really spoken to Dave since he went to actually Postal. He was on Festina, and then he went to Postal. And when he was in Festina, I can only imagine in that era, for a guy that young, that, I think he was influenced by some people there. Dave came up with a really solid upbringing, like very wholesome family, very supportive family. So there was nothing that you would have believed that he would get into anything that he shouldn't have. And I have no idea if he did or he didn't, but he definitely changed when he was at Festina. And what I can't imagine is that a young American guy on a French team at that point, for sure, he's not getting good race starts. I mean, he's doing probably every lousy Belgian Kermesse or Belgian race you can imagine.
Right.
And, he ended up going to the Vuelta one year, and he rode actually quite well. I think when he was on Festina, he was riding. They had the lead at one point, I believe, and he was riding the front. I remember watching him on TV, and then the next year, I think he went to Postal. And then after that, it got a little bit strange for him. But yeah, he did show up he disappeared for a while, and then he came back, and he had all these facial tattoos. And I think the community was trying to support him. We were. I know the people who had raced with him, we were trying to support him.
Right.
And he just had some kind of trouble going on, and he wasn't square. So I'm not sure really what happened.
Yeah, maybe some demons going on there. So your team then evolves out Mercury to like HealthNet. And my other interaction or remembrance of you, I was here, and correct me because my memory could be totally wrong, but I think it was right. Watching the Toro California in 2007, and I think it was your last race with them, coming into the circuits, and you had a flat before you came in, And is this even correct? Because this is the way that the news. Hey, okay. Mike Sayers' last race at the Toro California coming into town, and he's not getting a chance to sprint in his hometown Sacramento.
Yeah, I actually crashed. I actually crashed on that West Sacramento run-in. Okay. I was trying to get to I was actually trying to take a couple of our guys to the front, and I got a little. It was my hometown, and it was the first time Toro California had come to Sacramento. Right. So of course, I mean, we had dreamed about this kind of an event our whole lives. And I got a little bit overzealous, and I went into I took a few too many risks. I ended up crashing, and it was disappointing. But yeah, lesson learned. I mean, that's all I can say is it meant so much to me that Toro California had come to Sacramento and was like in my hometown, and I had spent all these years away from my hometown, never racing in my hometown outside of like Land Park Criterium that. It was just so overzealous, and I just got a little bit ahead of myself. So,
head above the ski, out in front of your skis.
Yeah.
Look, so the team happens. You're in the mix when they decide. Because John Warden, I think, was your manager, right, for most of that kind of section of racing
up until Mercury, and then when Mercury stopped, he stopped, or he went on to other things, and then. When HealthNet started, we had a guy from Georgia, Jeff Corbett.
Yeah, right.
And then Corbett was the manager until I left and went to BMC.
But when you were with Mercury, it seemed like you guys had, or maybe Warden's idea was trying to get into the tour. So you brought in like Pedigon. I'm trying to remember these guys' names.
Pedigum.
There you go.
Yeah.
Floyd Landis, obviously. And I remember there were some contract issues. But your big drive to get into the tour that year did not come about. And some of these teams have taken on big riders and a big budget in the hopes that, hey, we're going to get selected. And what was your role in that season, and how was that? Because your budget, I imagine, went way up because your team basically doubles in size.
Yeah, that year was. We probably, as a group, have more stories from that season of 2001 than 10 seasons combined. But yeah, at that point, there was a long stretch where I was the only guy, and then I was the only guy in Europe, and then Floyd would come, and it was like there was a long stretch, like 2 or 3 months during the classics, where Floyd and I were literally the only two Americans on this team racing. And my manager or director at that point was Alain Galopin, who just recently retired from Trek. And very helpful guy. I love Alain. He was a good director. He had a ton of knowledge. And it was a weird era, and I was just trying to survive. I mean, the fact was I was just trying to survive. And I was in a support role for sure. And I was doing the classics. I did all the classics. And this is what I'll say, because I ended up working closely with Gerrit Van Bont, who was a rider on that team, and then ended up he's now a manager at Quick Step. But he was running the BMC under 23 team. Anyway, we had some overlap. And, those Belgian guys treated me very well. I have not one bad thing to say. They tried to help me as much as they could. But there is the one thing about Van Petegem is if you watch Peter race, he is and was and will always be one of the greatest classic riders of all time. And I remember situations where the one thing about Peter is he liked one of two spots in the peloton, either dead last, and I mean it, like he was either last wheel or he was off the front. And when he was last wheel, there were several races where I was in charge of just kind of looking after him. And it would be a scenario where he would call me back and he would start to unload clothes. And, the one thing, Peter didn't say very much. He literally didn't say very much. He just didn't, he wasn't very verbal. But he was a good leader, and, he knew those races. I mean, the guy won a ton of races there, but he would call me back to take his clothes and to kind of unload. And as he would get undressed, at the back of the field, knowing that his time was coming to perform, he would complain about the weather. He would be like, I hate it when it's like this. He would complain about the race was too fast or the race was too slow. I mean, there was always, he always had, he was just an everyday guy, right? Just like all of us. The thing that was really interesting is that he would give me his clothes, and I would go back to the car and I would start to unload his and everybody else's. And literally I could when I was back at the car, like unloading clothes to Alon, I would hear on the radio that Peter was in the break. And I would just be like,
I just saw him.
I'm not even kidding you. Like 2 minutes ago,
Right.
I was just next to him. And this was the kind of rider he was. We used to call him a magician because people have no idea how hard it is to move up in those races. Number one, roads are small, roads are bad, and it's going wicked fast. But for him to just be able to buzz to the front, and then all of a sudden he's just like, he's looking. Oh, that's the one that's going to work, and he goes. It's like, that's like another level. That's like level you've never seen. And so I was just there to help. I mean, I literally would go back to the hotel at night or after the race, and I would be crushed. I mean, like physically destroyed. And those guys would go out and they would ride the next day, like 3 or 4 hours. I couldn't do it. Like I would go ride for an hour, and I would just be like, I would be crying on my bike, and we're riding, you know, because they would go out and they would still ride, you know, 42 or 45K an hour, and I would just be ragdolling on the back of these guys, you know, knowing that I had to race again tomorrow. So in my mind, I'm trying to calculate, okay, well, if I do this today and I raced 200K yesterday, am I going to even be able to get out of bed tomorrow?
So what was your thinking of the hopes for the team? Because at some point you have to wonder, am I going to be able to sustain this, or do I hope it doesn't go and we go back down to a Conti level?
Oh, no. I definitely, I wanted it to continue on. Right. I mean, it was, for me, it was my opportunity. Like no one, 5 years before that, no one would have ever pointed at me and said, oh, that guy is going to possibly ride. That guy is going to start Tour of Flanders.
Right.
Or that guy's going to do this or do that. Like this was my opportunity. So I was trying to do every single thing I could to make it work. And then on top of all of that, even when the team stopped, because if everybody remembers, the team kind of half ran out of money, and we ended up finishing that season. And I really kid you not, we ended up finishing that season not getting paid, not getting our travel covered, and essentially splitting prize money. And those races included like Altoona, Green Mountain, some of those late season East Coast races that we were winning. Like that year, Floyd, I believe, somebody will probably say I was wrong, but I believe Floyd won Altoona that year. And Altoona back then was a fortune. It was like $100,000 in prize money. We were living off of that money. That was paying the bills. And there were a number of guys on that team that ended up in financial difficulty because they weren't getting paid for almost 6 months. I mean, we ended up getting our 3-month bank guarantee, but at the end of the day, we ended up going like 6 months and not getting paid.
This was 01?
Yeah.
So you guys had to basically request that from the UCI, the bank guarantee and all that.
Yeah.
I almost feel like the team, when I was with Oil Me, we were part of the reason that had to be the case because our team manager was kind of floating the bill himself a lot, and we weren't getting funds. He was kind of, they went to Malaysia, a bunch of winning out there with Chad Gerlach, and were expected to get paid. And he was hoping to kind of use some of it, and it never happened. And the IRS came and took his stuff. Anyway, so it's good for the structure, I think, to have the bank guarantee and that you guys had to utilize that. But I remember a big controversy with, I guess was it Warden? Was it there? No, he was still there.
Yeah, he was there.
Him and Landis, kind of whether Landis was going to go to the new team with Lance, and some issues with his income. So
yeah, well, it was hard. I mean, Floyd was in a difficult position because, I mean, we were the ones who found Floyd. I mean, Floyd was a great rider, is a great person, but we dug him out of nothing. And when he came with us, we could see within 5 minutes. I mean, not even 5 minutes. It was like 5 seconds. And I remember we all looked at each other. We ended up we actually ran into him for the first time, I think, in Cantua Creek of all places. And it was Floyd and 5 Mercury guys in the break. And Gord Fraser, who was the guy that I rode for most of my career and for many years, my best friend, Gord turned to Floyd and told him, "Hey, listen, so this is how this is going to go down. There's 5 of us and there's 1 of you, and we're going to take first and second, and you can have third, and then we'll take fourth and fifth, no problem." And Floyd just looked him square in the eye and he said, "Give me your best shot because I'm not giving you it. I'm not giving it to you." And he just went right to the front and literally tried to ride 5 of us off the wheel. And I'm not going to lie to you, he came pretty darn close. And after the race, we finished. I think Floyd ended up 3rd, but we finished. And Gordon and I looked at each other, and we rode right to Warden, and we said, "That guy in the silver and blue jersey over there, you need to go sign that guy right now. Like, don't even think twice." And that was kind of the beginning. And then, he went on to get his own success like every bike rider does. But, Floyd was the type of guy he was. And I mean, we have a million stories about why he is the way he is or was the way he was. But he was successful because he was stubborn. Warden was very stubborn. And when you put 2 stubborn people together, a lot of time there can be friction. Warden was not an easy manager to have. He was not very sympathetic. But what I want to say about John is that he taught me a lot that I used in my future when I went to direct and I was in management and at the national team. He taught me a ton, maybe more than anybody, about what it is to build a team and what you need to have a successful team. And I'm not saying he did this consciously. Some of this was subconscious for sure, but he taught me what it is to build a team. And the one thing that he taught me that I still live by today is that you go for team speed will overcome any deficit. So yes, you need to have climbers and you need to have sprinters and guys who work and time, and you need all that for sure. But what he would do is he would go and he would look at a guy like Scott Moniger and he would say, "Okay, you have Moniger and he's probably the best climber at that time or the best pure climber at that time and a top 5 time trialist. Okay, so clearly he's a stage racer. But he can ride criteriums as well as any guy."
Right.
And if you watch that guy, he can actually sprint pretty well.
Right.
So what he would do is he made it a point to make sure he got Moniger because he knew that the fast guys on the team, the Gourds and myself and Derek Bouchard Hall and John Peters and all these guys that were really, really fast, we can go to these races and make it really, really fast, and Scott will not get dropped. And if you look at teams that came before us, specifically Coors Light, they had actually a similar model. Lynn Pettyjohn, who was a mentor of Moniger's, Pettyjohn did the same thing. He built a bunch of fast guys, and then he threw Mike Engelman in there. Right? The problem with Engelman was not very fast, and he wasn't very good at handling his bike, so he would run into trouble. But Scott was the total opposite. Scott was extremely good at handling his bike, and he was really fast.
Well, Engelman, a little late to the game. He had been a runner, so maybe that had played into it. Your point about Moniger being a great crit rider is exactly true. What's interesting, I was looking, Levi, another climber guy, he won the amateur criterium championships in 96. So, you had Vaughters, another guy that could handle himself in crits. So I don't know, let me ask you this. So with the young kids coming up, do you see them having to be so good at crit riding as what the pros used to be able to, or had to do at the time? Horner, another one, right? That could do well. Super weak. We're out there and he laps us twice in a crit. I mean, this is a climber guy, but I guess back then he wasn't as much. But young kids now, are they forced to be able to crit ride for US ones as they were back then?
Well, I think the young guys today, it's definitely a different mindset from top to bottom for the young guys, and it's a different approach. They don't race as much, number one, because training is better and you have power meters, things like that.
Right.
So they're not forced to race criteriums like we were forced to race criteriums. They're not a normal part of their operation. And when you go to Europe, for sure, you're not getting a crit. Right. So between like Axel's team, the national team, and teams that have come before, and even teams like Jelly Belly, where they would go to Asia a lot. Again, there's not a lot of criteriums. So I think some of the young guys see less criteriums than they used to. I also think that because they're given larger opportunities globally, they don't feel like they need to ride a local criterium because it's like, well, I just got back from a 3-week trip and I'm just going to go train as opposed to go race, I don't know, a criterium in Pleasanton or something like that. So I don't think they race crits as much. It would be great if they did. I think I'm always a proponent of pushing riders to another level, on the other hand, at the national team, we used to circumnavigate that problem by sending a lot of our guys to Holland. And my old boss, Jim Miller, who was at Oil Me, I think with you.
Yes.
You know, Jim had a saying, and Jim and I actually had a lot of sayings. I really love Jim. But he had a saying, and I embraced the saying as I got into it, which is, if you can make it in Holland, you can make it anywhere. Literally, and I kid you not. If you can race in Holland and be even remotely successful, you can make it anywhere. And I think you can see this now. Like, if you go to YouTube, there's a lot of these Dutch amateur races that are that they show the race, like just on YouTube. It's like bike footage, you know. And at first, you're looking at this and they'll have the whole race. It'll be like 4 hours long. And you look at it, and at first you're just watching it, and they're on these flat roads, and they're just, you know, it's typical left, right, you know, road furniture everywhere. But then they always have the little like graphics at the bottom, like the speed and the power and the whole thing. And you start watching that, and all of a sudden you're like, that guy has been sitting on 350 watts for like an hour and a half. And then you start really watching it, and you watch his power, like you watch how the power goes. And you're like, yeah, but they're 5 wide, and the speed is, you know, 52K an hour, and he's doing over 300 watts. And then you realize, you're like, oh my Lord, like that's serious. And so, you know, we used to send guys to Holland, mostly climbers a lot of the time, because you just want them to learn how to race. And the only way to learn how to race is to go race those Dutch races.
Yeah,
for sure.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
So speaking of the younger group, you had a bunch of time working with the U23. Who in there did you work with that's kind of come up and about that everyone would know about?
Well, Nielsen for sure.
Right.
Sean Bennett now.
Okay.
I mean, the list is actually really long. I think I can just say that of the 30 or so guys that came through the program in any given time.
How long were you doing that?
4 years. I was a national team coach. And I would say that of the 30 regular attendants of our national team program, at least 85 to 90% of those guys are racing at the pro level. So, you know, there's Costa, there's Nielsen, there's Sean Bennett, there's even, I mean, it's sometimes hard to remember. Iman Lucas. There's Ben. Oh my Lord, Ben Wolf.
Okay.
I mean, the list just can go on. So we really had a great thing going there, and we really had a great group of riders. And even what I will say this is, even the guys that 15 or 20% that didn't make it, actually those 15 or 20% are off doing some really impressive things. So we have guys like Max Durchke, who's a Northeast guy who's on the national biathlon team, and he went to Middlebury. Maybe he went to Middlebury College or one of those Ivy League colleges. Yeah. We have a couple of guys like Stephen Lease from Santa Barbara. He works, I think, in tech at a really high level. So, you know, they all went on to something very successful, and they spent some time with us and contributed to the greater outcome. And now they're on doing other things.
Did you take it upon yourself to try to help these kids of not everyone's going to be a big star? And so, you know, we're here, we're coaching you doing this, but what about your life maybe after, or... Well, yeah, if you don't make it big. I mean, was that ever something to try to help with these kids?
That was a big part of it. We really tried to have, and I tried to spend a lot of time with a lot of conversation about, okay, what's going to happen if this doesn't happen for you? And, you know, what are you going to do? What's your plan? What do you have an interest? Do you like art? Do you like, you know, literature? Do you like working with your hands? Can you build something? You know, so we really would encourage guys to stay in school, finish out their winter semesters or their spring semesters. And then I always guaranteed guys, listen, if you can't come in the spring because you're going to school, I will absolutely make a spot for you in the summer or in the late spring or in the late summer into that fall, which is really important for the national team, because that's the approach to Tour de l'Avenir, which is the biggest under 23 stage race in the world. Right. So, sometimes I would have double programs, and I would spend extra budget just so guys who were going to school had a place to come and race in the late summer and get the European experience.
Yeah, because I imagine the European experience is kind of what, like you said, send them to Holland, doing all these other things, the best way to make it go forward. So you're with them. You've also done some stuff with the BMC program, like kind of from its inception. Is that kind of what happened from when you were done with Mercury or HealthNet?
Yeah. So Gavin Chilcott, who started that team, started the team. It was an amateur team in 2007. And he and I actually have this strange connection, like this kind of strange familial connection, like way, way, way back. But I knew Gavin from my racing days. I respected him. I knew he was a trendsetter, like had gone to Italy just after George Mount, was part of that. He really was a trailblazer. And then he ended up disappearing for a while. At the time, I didn't know what he was doing, but he ended up getting his PhD in microbiology. So incredibly smart guy. Anyway, he approached me in 2007 and asked me if I would be interested in becoming the senior member at that point of this BMC team, which he said was going to end up going to a very high level. And this was a phoenix from the ashes of the Phonak team.
Right.
So, he was reinventing it, and I had maybe 3 or 4 conversations with him, and I just said, yeah, I absolutely, no question. And then I was able to bring Moniger with me, so we kind of did it together. And Gord had retired at that point, so it gave us all kind of a new start on a new program. And I was with that as a rider for 3 years, and then I got an incredible, completely unique opportunity to move into management into the director's role. There had not been an American director at a World Tour team since Mike Neal. You could say Jonathan Botters, but he was a manager. He was looking at the global picture. So it was really like Mike Neal and then me. And I jumped at it. I didn't even hesitate. And I really enjoyed that position. I really would venture to say that I enjoyed being a director maybe more than I did being a rider. I miss the camaraderie. It's two different things. Like, I miss the camaraderie of being a rider. Like, I miss the guys being part of that locker room, quote unquote. Right. But from a 10,000 foot view, I much more enjoyed being a director. And when I left BMC, it was because I wanted to reconnect with my family. I was a little bit out of touch. And I wanted to reconnect with my family. And then when I got the opportunity to go to the national team, it was almost like a perfect hybrid. It was like Jim had created this perfect hybrid of a program that I was able to step into and was able to race at a really high level, because that's what I really cared about. But at the same time, have meaningful relationships with guys. And whether those guys know it or not, they taught me as much as I ever taught them, probably more, about what it was to fight and to keep yourself sane and to deal with not having any success, to deal with having success. And as the thing went along, we really had a plan. We really had a plan where we thought the thing was going to end up and where it was going to go. And the plan was working. The last year I was there, we had Costa on the podium at Tour de l'Avenir, and Nielsen won the stage at the top of the Croix de Fer. Right. And that was it. Like, the next year, we were going to get McNulty was going to come into the program, and we were going to get a few more guys. And USA Cycling wanted to go a different direction. They wanted to pursue this track thing, and so that's the direction that they went, and I ended up having to leave the program. But we were on a good path. We really were on a good path at that moment.
What is their status right now?
That's a question you would have to ask Derek. That question.
He's stepping out, right?
Yeah,
he was the teammate of yours as well, I think.
He was.
So, okay. So I'm not going to ask Derek because I don't have.
Yeah, I don't know where they're going right now.
But as far as do they have a road team like they did before when you were there, or is it?
Yeah, they have a road team, and it's very much scaled down. It's about the fifth of the size when I was there, and it's just we really would. When I was there, we were aiming for 100 race days a year for the program. So we would shoot for 100 race days a year, all in Europe. So it was like, a lot of 2.1s, 2.2s, 1.2s, some amateur racing, but for the most part, I took those guys to UCI races. I would only take them to an amateur race or an under 23 race if it was at the top level. So like Aosta in the Aosta Valley of Italy, or if it was some of these other Italian races that, and there were a couple of programs that were clearly models for me. Like I really tried to model our program off the Australian model. They have an absolutely incredibly successful under 23 program. I mean, hands down, probably the best in the world. And so I tried to model my program after theirs. The British also have a great program. The Danish and the Norwegians have a great program. So, you know, those were, and even the French came very late, but very successful. So like Gaudu won Tour de l'Avenir, and, you know, I mean, they came with some success late because, again, they were building it in a very systematic manner. And French cycling has had a revelation really in the last like 5 years.
Right. It'll be interesting to see if they can capitalize and give the top step of the tour, which is what they're obviously with Bardet. And I don't know if they really have, who do they have besides Bardet? Pinot,
and then they have this young Gaudu
who's been with Wanty Group, Gobert.
And then there's a young guy who went to FDJ, and I can't think of his name right now. But they have some quality riders. I mean, they have riders that can develop into something for sure, into race winners for sure. And their development program is really good. I mean, they really do. They have a director there that's very hands-on, very kind and caring, and does very well.
And you need a development because you obviously have to have that influx coming up. You know, BMC, they had kind of a development program going, and they cut that out. And to some extent, I guess I understand, because if you're just developing these riders and then they're going elsewhere, that's not really going to help you as much.
Yes and no. But if you look at the most successful under 23 program in history was the Rabobank program.
Okay.
So if you look at Rabobank, and these guys do it right. I tell you, these guys do it right. So they're now Lotto Jumbo. They're not Lotto Jumbo anymore. They just got a new sponsor, but that's the team that Nielsen rides for. These guys do it right. So if you look, they had juniors, under 23s, the pro guys, the pro women. They had every level. And they would take these riders from juniors and they would take them to the under 23s, and they would expose them to really hard racing, really good racing. And, you know, the fact is they probably burned out more guys than they drove to the next level. But the way they looked at it was, if one of their riders went on to be a professional, for them, that was a success. They really believe that. They really believe that it didn't. Okay, they clearly wanted the best of the best for their own World Tour program, but there's nothing wrong with a rider going to another team, because if he has a good history with your team, there's probably an excellent chance he will come back. So, you know, let's say he goes to a French team and he rides for 2 years, and then he's like, oh, you know, I'm going to go back. He knows the directors, he knows the manager, he picks up the phone, he makes a phone call. If he's successful or has continued success, they'll probably take him back because he knows the system.
So why do you think BMC dumped that? Was it more of an economics thing?
It's hard to say. I don't know. I wasn't there at the time.
You weren't part of that.
I wasn't part of that. I mean, I was part of it from the outside. Like we were racing against those guys, but I don't know what the inner workings were.
What's your feeling now that, you know, you basically were in the start with them and they're essentially gone? I mean, CCCC is kind of in the new team, but I don't know that that's really.
My overall feeling on it is that it's a great program. It was a great program. Tons of super talented people from staff to riders went through that program and learned their trade. They take care of their riders at the highest level. They care about their riders. Their riders perform very well. The company, BMC, puts a ton into R&D, which has a lot to do with their success. And I think that, you know, that's an ongoing chapter in the Jim Akowitz saga, which at the end of the day, when Jim retires or moves on and retires at Beaver Lake in Wisconsin, which my wife's family lives there.
Oh, okay.
When Jim finally hangs it up, I mean, I just he's going to have to be acknowledged as probably the most influential personality in American cycling ever.
Well, sure.
And so this is just another chapter in that book. And he has done things in the past that no one else could get done. So you have to give him the credit. You have to acknowledge his success. And he's a highly driven individual, and he only settles for success. So, he's taught a lot of people how to do things and sent them on their way. And then, people have had their own successes outside of his teams.
So staying on kind of the world tour idea, what's your thought of them going away, and then like Sky, their sponsorship is dwindled out for the next few years, and just kind of what's your view of the map of the sport, and take it from there.
I think we have to change the business model.
Okay.
The business model needs to change. I think.
Do you have some ideas on how?
Well, I think we have some great examples right now. Like I think the Israeli Academy team is a great example. So it is a professional team. They started as a very small team, and they grew it step by step. The manager, Rand Margolese, has grown that program every single step of the way. But they're racing under the umbrella of a community. So the Jewish community is a big community and that community transcends borders. It transcends economics. It transcends everything. So it's something that their community can get behind and can succeed with and support and see a lot of success. So that's a great example of a different business model that I think is ultimately going to be super successful. I mean, they already are, but I mean, like Tour de France successful.
So where do they get their funding? Is it
they do have some donors that support them, but the donors are supporting them. And again, I don't want to speak their message because I don't know it as well as they do, but their donors are supporting the cause, not just the team. So the cause of expanding cycling in a community that didn't traditionally have cycling.
Right.
Expanding the cause, that they are a global community, and they do transcend borders, and they do transcend economics and all those things. So it's really they're just trying to further their message, whatever that individual message is, and the team is just a platform for that. So I think it's a great business model.
No, and for them, I can see that. I think it could be different if you try to twist that Katusha. I mean, we're going to have like so I don't know how that works. And the problem you have with cycling is it's not held. It's the 49ers or Oakland Raiders, and you buy their gear and you go to the stadium, and the stadium collects fees, and it's so wide open and accessible. I think it's very difficult to really bring that in. And look at Colorado. I mean, they've now taking the men out and just having a women's only race. What do you think of their decision to do that?
Well, I think every organization has to figure out what's going to work for them.
Right.
And I think the ladies group right now is extremely dynamic.
Right.
I mean, a lot of good racing, a lot of good teams, a lot of opportunities. So I mean, women's athletics right now is on a big upswing, and it's probably long overdue. So they're capitalizing on an upswing, and I'm sure they're a for-profit company, so they have to maximize their dollars.
Right.
And the men come with baggage. That's not a good word, but it's more expensive to get them there.
Oh, gotcha.
The teams are bigger.
Right.
They expect more.
Right.
And I think the ladies teams can come. They can run a little leaner. Like they don't have to have as many staff and they don't have to do all that stuff, but they come and they race just as hard and just as well as the men, and sometimes the racing is more exciting.
Right.
So I think for Colorado, I mean, you would have to ask them, but I think they clearly saw some value in it, and they're just going to pursue that for a while. Okay, that's awesome. The men have a lot of racing that they can go and do, and on top of everything else, let's be honest. I mean, these teams, they want the best teams in the world, and that time of year for Colorado is very difficult for the World Tour teams.
Right.
They have a lot. They have Tour of Poland. They got the Vuelta. They've got Belgium, I think, at that time. That's a lot of riders that you have to try to support. And if no World Tour team wants to show up to a race with 5 guys, because that's not a show of strength. that's a show that you're just throwing some guys in a bike race.
Well, and I don't know, maybe the attitude is they come over here and it's a little, hey, the U.S. in this time of year, I'm kind of burnt. I'm just gonna enjoy Colorado. So the show that gets put on by the women is maybe a little bit more interesting at this point. Yeah. Okay,
it could be.
I don't know. We're speculating that's what we do here.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap this up in a little bit. Let's ask you though about the amateur racing masters, because that's what you do now. Your team is Dye Endurance and Touchstone Racing. I think you guys have a good team on this area.
Yeah.
And you can talk about that a little bit, but I also want you to just touch real quick on what do you think the future is of road racing with the gravel coming on and everything else like that.
Oh, I think it's really interesting. I think the gravel thing is really, really interesting. I think it could. So, gravel is global at this point, yes, but I feel like it kind of started here in America, and America has done some really unique things. High School Mountain Bike League is probably the shining example of taking a different approach. So I think the gravel is going to open opportunities for teams. It's going to open opportunities for sponsors. It's going to open opportunities for riders, so it just gives you more things to do and different things to do and more experiences to have, because ultimately I think the gravel scene is about the experience. Now, it certainly can morph and has morphed to a degree, but probably will morph more so into more of a competitive thing, but it's more of an internal competition. It's like me competing against myself.
So more marathon-like?
Yeah, more marathon-like. Yeah, I think
Which those things, I don't know if you listened or watched our show, but Chris did the CIM, 2 weeks ago, and he pondered, this is so much interest out there. There's all these people. It's such a positive atmosphere, and then you go to a bike race, and it just seems not.
Yeah.
And so, if you're talking about the experience.
Yeah, and I think the experience is, you do these grasshopper events or whatever, and the vibe is really cool. Like, everybody's supportive, and there's a competition factor, but I think I enjoy it. I mean, I've done Lost and Found. I did Sagan's Gran Fondo. I did a few other small things, but I have my gravel bike and I get out and I do it, and I think it's a great way to do it. And if we can get some kids into doing it, I think it bridges that gap between the mountain biking part of it and the road riding, because as a father of a 12-year-old or nearly a 12-year-old, I understand like letting your kid out on the open road can be a little nerve-wracking,
right?
And you can only ride the bike trail so many times. But if you can get them out on some gravel roads where there's no cars, I mean, that's a great gap to kind of fill.
Does your son ride? Does he?
He does not. He rides with me occasionally. We do a ride together, but it's not his focus, and we're totally okay with that.
Right, and you have to be. A reader commented in Sean Bagley, as of course you know him.
Yeah.
He wanted to know what it was like leading out Gord Fraser all those years on the sprints, especially in Europe, if you did that.
Well, I can say this is it's a really unique experience when you have a rider of that caliber that literally can come through 95% of the time. It makes, I mean, I would say that the guys at Mercury that were the workers, for lack of a better term, physically their job was harder, but mentally a lot less difficult,
right? Because
it was very easy. It was like we ride flat out until 200 meters, and then that's it. And so, for me, he instilled in me a level of confidence that I never could have had in myself. I think it was a two-way street though, because I remember many situations where I would go back to Gord and he would be like, "Yeah, I just don't feel it today. Like, I think we should ride for somebody else." He didn't feel well, or he just didn't think he could get it done. And we would kind of say, hey, let's just get to like 10K to go and let's reevaluate. And a guy like that, when you get him within 10K to go, it's like a horse to a barn. Like, then he throws the switch and then it's on.
Right.
And you know what? If you have a guy that's that successful and that knowledgeable and the type of leader that will hold everybody accountable for good or for bad, you get to that point in a bike race and you will go that extra mile. Like, you will shoot that gap that you wouldn't normally shoot before, or you will when you think, yeah, man, my legs are done. Like, I just can't do this. You will take that 1 second extra pull just to try to get him, 1 second farther down the road, because in the back of your mind, there is a 95% chance that he's going to win today, which benefits all of us. I mean, it does.
Gord, anybody want to check in on him? He's got a prolific career, a lot of wins. And now he's coaching or managing with Floyd, I think, right?
That's correct.
And he had been doing
correct.
the silver cycling team. So
Yep.
Canadian, big history in cycling. So was he maybe the best finisher that you worked with over the years?
Consistently, yeah. And yeah, I mean, I'm willing to go out there and say, yeah, he was the best finisher I ever, by quite a bit, because it wasn't just the consistency; it was the knowledge base. He knew how to win sprints, not just fastest guy to the line, but I mean, he knew how to come from behind, although he didn't like to do that. He knew how to, he knew how to hold people off. He knew his competition. So when he went into a sprint and he was looking around and he would see, Graham Miller on one side, or even those years like when it was Cipollini, he knew what those guys could do, and he would work it out in his mind how he needed to have the sprint go so that he could try to win. And, when you ride with a guy for almost 10 years, what he likes. And for me, it was very easy. I knew exactly what he liked and what he didn't like. He didn't like to be in the washing machine behind, he wanted to be out on his own, or he wanted to be in front of all the other sprinters, which was why very often he would come to us and say, hey, we have to start working now, because, he would come up with some reason, but ultimately he just didn't want to be fighting for wheels.
Right. Speaking of Cipollini, you rode with Malcolm Elliott, is that correct?
I did for 1 year.
Was he the original Cipollini off the bike?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know what I'll say about Malcolm is I got him at the end of his career,
right.
But he was kind of on his way. He was definitely kind of on his way out mentally, probably more than physically. But we went on that little run at Philly that year. Oh no, Tour de Beauce that year when we had Vaughters and Trent Klosna, and Malcolm. I tell you, those guys, we got first and third on GC that year at Tour de Beauce. I believe Vaughters won and Trent was third. It may be the other way around. But Malcolm was the one who got us to the finish. Malcolm was the one who said, who went from being 38 years old to 28 overnight.
Right.
And he
for
was
at least a day or two.
Yeah. And he was like, oh, we're doing this.
Right.
We're doing this. And that was a great experience for me, because he was as smart as any bike rider you ever know, but he just was on his way out at that point and he was ready to stop. But then he got that little injection of youth, and he saw the young guys fighting and trying to make it happen. And it took 10 years off his life overnight, like you said.
Yeah, it did it for. So quick question. Favorite Christmas movie?
Oh, Die Hard.
We just saw that the other night. I introduced that to all the kids and they loved it.
Die Hard,
I don't know.
sure.
You know who Cosmo Catalano is? He does videos and stuff for cycling. How the race was won. He's been doing a 12 days of Christmas of Die Hard and doing a breakdown. You should check that out. It's pretty good. How do people get a hold of you with your business, and if they need to contact you or want a training or anything?
Yeah, you can just go to our website, dieendurance.com. So it's DAI in the word endurance, all one word. .com. Just go to the website. We got a great website. You can hit the contact us button and it'll come right to my email, and we'll go from there.
And they could go hang out at the facility.
Yeah, you
as
can
well?
come down, get a bike fit or whatever, or do some strength and conditioning classes, whatever. We're very flexible. We're very open.
All right. Well, good luck to you this season. And Brody, thanks for coming in as well. It's Brody, right?
Yeah, it's Brody. And thanks for having us. It's great to be guests here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I plan on having you again later on in the year. We could talk some more cycling, because World Tour, everything that happens, Northern California, the women's race, Toro California, everything that's going on, you obviously have a big voice in it. So appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks.